Dr. Beebe? Dr. Beebe is not present. Dr. Bophy? Dr. Bophy is not present. Ms. Bradford? Here. Ms. Bradford is present. Mr. Garvey?
Here.
Mr. Garvey is present. Mr. Gio?
Present.
Mr. Gio is present. Ms. Harris?
Nope.
Ms. Harris is not present. Ms. Hill is not present. Dr. Moranti?
Present.
Dr. Moranti is present. Ms. Orange-Jones? Ms. Orange-Jones is not present. Mr. Romer?
Here.
Mr. Romer is present. Ms. Smith?
Here.
Ms. Smith is present. You have a quorum.
Okay. Can we have our first item, please?
Your first item is on page 1, item 2.1, consideration of Type 2 and Type 5 charter applications as recommended by the Superintendent of Education. The department recommendation is to approve as noted in the exec rec.
Okay. Can we get a motion to approve? Mr. Romer, second. Mr. Gio. Do we have any cards on this item? No? Okay. Do we have any questions from any of the BESE members? Hearing none, do we have any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item.
Your next item is item 2.2 on page 12, consideration of revisions to the Charter School Performance Compact. The department recommendation is to approve.
Can we get a motion to approve? Ms. Moranti. Second. Ms. Bradford. Sorry about that. We have cards on this. Do we have any questions from BESE members? Mr. Superintendent?
I might make just one comment. Members, just to be give you a refresher on this. In 2012, we created essentially a review structure that establishes a set of goals and measures for every charter school and is the basis on which they're reviewed. I think that this has a national model. I know it's a national model that has allowed us to give, in most cases, strong, firm feedback to charter schools about areas for change, positive areas of performance outside of standardized test scores and such, including issues regarding students with disabilities, for example, which makes up an entire section of the performance score that school systems, the charter schools are graded on. It's the kind of review process that has also allowed us to unearth some serious issues at a couple of isolated instances at the board level or at the school level, and to take swift action on those, while at the same time not over-regulating. This has allowed us to unify a bunch of very fragmented state and federal regulations into one seamless system so that we're not constantly and randomly in the business of school principals. We are proposing today to make a couple of changes, not in the finance area, but in the organizational area and in the academic area. In particular, we're looking at technical revisions to address potential changes in letter grade and school performance score calculations that will come as the result of upcoming test scores, including an academic supporting evidence category in the academic section to provide school leaders and school board members with a clear vision on how schools are meeting the needs of students with disabilities, and to enhance the section regarding organizational feedback, in particular also in connection with students with disabilities, discipline, school facilities, and enrollment issues. I'm happy to take any specific questions from you. I'm sure there'll be a couple of comments, but I should say this. There is a, I think, unfortunately politicized discussion about, is there oversight of charters or is there not? School boards under our Constitution oversee our district schools, and BESE oversees our district schools. But BESE is the regulator of charter schools in a more direct fashion. BESE takes a very direct role in the department in the oversight of charters, and at the same time tries to be respectful of charters' legal capacity or legal obligation to be an autonomous, serve as an autonomous school. I think we have struck the appropriate level of empowerment versus regulation in this compact, and all we're bringing to you today is a set of efforts to strengthen it, to enhance it from lessons that we've learned in the field over the last 3 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Do we have any questions from the BESE members before we hear from the speakers? Okay. Please have Sarah Vandergriff come down and Mr. Richard. please. 3 minutes, yeah, that's fine.
Thanks. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and board members. I'm Sarah Vandergriff on behalf of the State Charter School Association. We support these changes as they represent not only steps towards basing decisions around better data accuracy, but they will also provide better clarity and transparency as to the expectations set for both charter schools and their authorizers. So on behalf of LEPCS, we do say we support these proposed changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Richard and Mr. Fleming, if you could come on down, please. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and BESE members. Again, Scott Richard, representing the Louisiana School Boards Association. In regards to the organizational performance framework that's presented here today, the issue that we discussed a few minutes ago about funding and enrollment in regards to the passage of Senate Bill 267, there were some very succinct enrollment percentages included in Senate Bill 267, now signed into law, that we believe should be part of the performance framework. And we respect the fact that the board and the department provides oversight to charter schools and special ed enrollment, and we realize that a school was closed recently for not complying with enrollment requirements. And to really provide the level of transparency and assure the public that dollars are following the students that generate the dollars, we would respectfully request that there be some inclusion of those enrollment requirements and clarification in this performance framework in regards to how charter schools are funded. And it goes back to the same issue we raised earlier with Senate Bill 267. The state share was obviously corrected and put into alignment with the law, that the students that generate the dollars, those dollars follow the student. Again, the local share is still up in the air, and I think it was acknowledged. I don't want to speak for Superintendent White or Mrs. Hunt, but it's pretty clear that the local share, there's an average amount being calculated. We can only assume that because no one has that information. No one is able to ascertain that information, even though it's been requested. And in closing, and maybe in order to clear things up, we would respectfully request on behalf of the school boards that there be some type of document or reference material as to how the local share is calculated, so we can understand this and better and put it to rest and make sure that everyone is complying with their performance frameworks and the law. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Fleming?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. There are some elements in the Charter Performance Compact that strengthen what's looked at regarding services to kids with disabilities. I do believe one aspect that needs to be considered and strengthened is the enrollment factor. Because as I look at a number of things, it's broken down in a couple of ways. What are the critical indicators, the kind of do or dies, if you will? If you don't do this, you know, and some of those are IDEA regulations that you have to provide these services, identify kids, etc. But all that implies or is based on whether you have kids with disabilities in your school. So the enrollment requirement is not a critical indicator. It's 4 points out of 100. So a school can basically pass the test with a 96 without meeting the requirement that's in statute to enroll a fair share of kids with disabilities. Considering there have been 20 years of charter schools with concerns of, you know, whether they're enrolling a fair share of kids with disabilities, in Orleans Parish they infused the One App, and the One App is actually mentioned in that performance compact. But that, and I've brought this to the board a couple of times, that One App process does not apply to schools outside of Orleans Parish. And y'all are opening many more charter schools throughout the state, which may or may not be following adequate procedures. Even with the one app, and I've read a couple of reports that there are ways of recruitment and selective admissions that get around direct discrimination. And I do think the one way you can look at that is fair enrollment. You know, are you enrolling the fair share of kids? And if the indicators don't have that as a really highly valued component, you know, I would see somebody saying, well, I'll take a hit on this and I'll score my points down on the bottom of the page with the kids I do enroll. So I would encourage y'all to strengthen that and even make it a critical indicator. Thank you.
Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you. I don't want to get into a shouting match about this. I know you're looking forward to me engaging in one, but I'm not going to do it. I do want to just give the facts, because I don't disagree with what Mr. Fleming is saying. As I see it here, Sean, special education APR determinations count for 6 points out of 100, and roll is 4 points out of 100, identifying high needs at-risk students is 4 points out of 100, rights required IEPs 4 points out of 100, special ed placements and programming 4 points out of 100, discipline procedures for students with disabilities 4 points out of 100, and on and on and on. In other words, I think there's a significant percentage here that gets to where you're trying to go. I'm happy to talk about with you offline, but there's a real attempt by the department to create something fair. Now, let me say something that might be a little bit more, I hope, unifying, but potentially inflammatory. I really think we need to stop talking about charter schools not serving kids with disabilities and district schools serving kids with disabilities, because that's just not what the facts say. And if we're going to have a conversation about schools that take kids with disabilities, let's look at all of our schools, okay? Because the fact of it is, we got plenty of non-public schools, traditional public schools, and charter public schools that don't serve their fair share of students with disabilities. We've got a school down the road, one of the most elite, prestigious high schools in the state, which is a fantastic school, I grant you. It's got a tiny percentage of kids with disabilities, and it's not a charter school. Now, we've got plenty of charter schools that need to pull their weight. We've got some publicly funded private schools that need to pull their weight. And we've got charter schools that need to pull their weight. I just think if we're going to have a conversation about schools that serve students with disabilities, let's start talking about all schools. And maybe as a board, perhaps in the next term, Sean, you and I can take that issue up. But I really think we need to end charter schools being the scapegoat of what should be a much larger discussion about our openness to students with disabilities. I'm sure you can appreciate that mission, but I think we need to broaden the dialogue. I'm not looking for a debate. This is a comment to you as a guiding thing for your future consideration. Thank you.
Any other members? If not, Ms. Fleming, I did have a question. You said that you think that there's a way, I'll use the phrase, to game the system on one app. Could you tell me what you think, that how someone might be able to do that?
By recruiting kids, by knowing which kids you're going out and recruiting. I mean, there was a report that was put out, it was from a guy from California, but I think it was from via the Tulane unit out there, that that interviewed administrators, and it's like a third of them indicated they go out and they recruit kids because there's two incentives to schools, and Superintendent White is correct, and I've brought this up. It's not just a charter school issue, but what y'all have established is a funding and accountability structure that incentivizes schools to not serve kids with disabilities. And I've used, Baton Rouge is, I think, a prime example of which schools are we going to save. So if they magnetize so many schools, y'all can't get them because their scores will go high enough, and y'all can't go after them for a charter, right? They keep those students, they keep those schools, and that's a problem. It's a segregation problem. The problem becomes, particularly when you're doing charter schools and you're dropping them in small school systems, and they are pulling out not a fair share of kids with disabilities. It's really disrupting the balance. And y'all accountability structure and y'all financial structures are saying, well, we're going to give you more points for your kids, regardless of if they have a disability or not. And it's an incentive to do it. Now, I've brought those things up in a number of different ways, and I will again bring up the issue of all schools when we talk about monitoring and the need for, increased oversight, special ed in general, which y'all have not had on-site monitoring in, 3 years or something? A long time. And I agree, it needs to happen. And y'all need to look at all your structures, because we're changing the landscape of education, but a bunch of the accountability pieces and funding structures are not being viewed in light of that landscape. And what I keep bringing forward to y'all is looking at how those things are impacting pressures and decisions. I don't even fault Baton Rouge or even a charter school for going after kids that's going to get it more money and higher scores. It's almost like the rules of the game that are put in front of them, and they're asked to follow. So knowing all this, I do think, and it's been established, and one of the indicators in there is, are you keeping the kids that you've had last year? Which is, for some schools, could be a contradiction of serving more kids with disabilities, because if you keep all the kids you had last year, you have less room for kids with disabilities to get in the door.
So I've got a challenge then I want to issue. I think that it is time we turn this corner and work together relentlessly on these issues of access. And that might necessitate people having to work alongside one another on some issues that are uncomfortable. But let me say a couple of uncomfortable things. There is an easy way to get around one app. The Orleans Parish School Board has found it by not having its schools enrolled in one app. The state has enrolled every one of its schools in one app. So there's an easy way around it. So I challenge the disabilities advocacy community to go to the Orleans Parish School Board and explain to them why they should put their kids in one app, because those are the schools that have the low percentage of students with disabilities, not the state-run charters. Secondly, there was an article in the paper this morning where a school board member in a parish near this one articulated why some of the gaming on SPS may well be happening in that parish. And it has everything to do with the sorting of students. I challenge you, as a community of disabilities advocates, to go to that school board and have them explain to you, are they or are they not separating kids? I don't support closed access, segregation, and certainly not segregation by race or by disability in charter schools, district schools, or public schools. What I ask for is equal advocacy from the disabilities community, from BESE, from the School Board Association and others, for all types of schools. Segregation in all types of schools should end. It's not a charter issue, it's not a district issue, it's not a private issue, it's an all issue. And sometimes that means we even have to create some perhaps difficult alliances to fight those things. I'd have no more comments on it. I just think we need to move in this direction.
Okay. Well, to close, I would say I think we're thinking a lot along the same lines. We just are not moving as fast as a lot of people would like to see. And I'd like to offer, if you go to Orleans Parish to their school board meeting, I'll join you for that issue.
We are charged with advocating to statewide issues and to statewide entities. We recognize the need for advocacy on a local level. The council is charged with educating and informing you as the state board and our legislature and our state level, policymakers and administrators on issues that y'all are engaged with. I'm sorry, that are influencing these decisions. So that is why you will not see us at Orleans Parish School Board, and why you do see us here.
If you have a group of parents that would like to go to Orleans Parish, I'll be happy to join them. Yes, Mr. Romer.
That answer is too convenient, Mr. Fleming. You are asking us to change our ways. Perhaps you also need to look in the mirror and change what you're doing as an advocate. I would say this board, more than any board in this state, has proven that when we have found somebody gaming the system, we close them. Okay? It's not an easy decision to close a school. We told them you're not in business anymore because we found out you were systematically making decisions that excluded kids with disabilities, and we wouldn't stand for it. Go ask yourself if any other district in the state has taken that same stand. So we're hand in hand in what the goal here is. I actually think we're setting the standard for other districts to look at themselves on how are you going to treat schools that systematically game the system. We made a stand. We're not going to allow it. So I would ask you to consider your own things, and the RSD in New Orleans is perhaps the greatest example where you could go make a stand. So I appreciate the spirit of what you brought to us today, but I would say this board, more than any other board in this state, has proven it will stand up. And we have changed dramatically how we're treating this children with disabilities and how we fund, and we've continued to say we will continue to look at how to make sure that that constituency is taken care of first, and we've made that clear. So I appreciate the sentiment of what you're saying, but I would say that perhaps you need to also expand the reach of what your organization is doing, which you've done a very good job at the state level. I think you and your organization has brought a lot of attention to this issue to this board. I think we've taken actions in those directions. I'd ask you to do the same elsewhere.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you. I would just, I think that I believe in bringing people to the table, and I think our superintendent is evidenced by the last session that we had is more than willing to do that. I would really just encourage some good dialogue between the School Board Association, our Superintendent's Advisory Council, Mr. Fleming, and to have those discussions in a meaningful way. Look at the problems that they're all suggesting. I don't know if they're really problems, but there's some issues that have got to be addressed, and I think with and this may have already happened, but if it hasn't, I think it's a good idea. Clearly, it's something that's going to continue to raise questions. I would just say that I think a good thing to do is get the stakeholders at the table, look at where the equity issues are, to have the discussions rather than here in the board meeting. Have the discussions where you can look at the data, have the discussion, come back with some recommendations. Because I think when you get everybody to the table, we'll be able to solve this. Thank you.
Okay. Any other BESE members? Hearing none. Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. Do we have any objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion carries. Next item.
Your next item is on page 14, item 2.3, consideration of a report regarding the audit and recommendations for Milestone Academy. The revised recommendation is to defer this item until October 2015.
Okay, can I get a motion to defer? Mr. Guillot, Mr. Romer, second. Any questions?
Members, it's just a matter of time, and the audit is not yet finished.
Okay. Any objections to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item.
That concludes the agenda.